The clatter of silverware echoed through the upscale restaurant, each sound cutting through the velvet silence like broken glass. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, casting fractured light across white tablecloths and polished wine glasses. But in the far corner, the atmosphere had shattered into chaos. 4 men loomed over a table, their voices low, sharp, dripping with menace. Their fists tightened around the lapels of a young black teenager's jacket, yanking him halfway out of his seat. Gasps spread through the room. A woman dropped her fork, the metallic clang ringing out like an alarm bell. The boy's chest heaved. His eyes darted between the strangers' faces, searching for mercy and finding none. The smell of roasted garlic and seared steak hung in the air, but now it mixed with the bitter tang of fear. Every heartbeat thundered louder than the clinking glasses. "Who do you think you are, sitting here like you belong?" one of the men hissed, his voice coarse and filled with contempt. Another shoved the teen against the table so hard that the wine spilled, deep red liquid staining the perfect white cloth like spreading blood. The entire restaurant froze. Waiters stood rooted in place, their trays trembling in their hands. Couples whispered, eyes wide, too afraid to interfere. And at the next table sat a man whose face was pale with disbelief, because he knew something the attackers didn't. The boy wasn't just any teenager. He wasn't just another easy target to humiliate. Beneath the quiet exterior, beneath the nervous breath and clenched jaw, was an identity that would turn their cruelty into the worst mistake of their lives. But in that moment, no one knew. Not the diners holding their breath, not the men gripping his collar. Not even the boy himself realized how tonight would change everything, how this confrontation would tear open secrets tied to power, privilege, and bloodlines that reached the highest ranks of the United States Army. The restaurant was silent. The teen's voice cracked as he whispered the words that made even his attackers falter for a heartbeat. "You have no idea who I am." Before that night of shattered glass and spilled wine, before the whispers of shock and the weight of silence inside the restaurant, there was just a boy who wanted to blend in, though blending in never seemed possible. His name was Marcus Williams. 16 years old, tall for his age, with the lean frame of someone still growing into his body. His skin, rich brown and unmissable, was the first thing people noticed about him in spaces where he was often the only black face in the room. His eyes carried a mix of quiet intelligence and restless energy, like someone who had seen more than he let on. Marcus was the son of a man who was rarely home but always present in the shadows of conversation, Colonel David Williams, a high-ranking officer in the United States Army. To Marcus's classmates, that made him privileged. To neighbors in their gated suburban community, it made the Williams family untouchable. But for Marcus, it often felt like the opposite. His father's reputation wasn't a shield, it was a burden. At school, Marcus's world was a careful performance. He wore sneakers too clean, shirts pressed with military precision, his father's influence even in absence. But no matter how neatly he dressed or how polite he spoke, he couldn't shake the subtle signals. The long pauses when teachers said his last name, the whispered jokes about him not really fitting in, the way classmates looked to him when rap music played in the cafeteria, as if expecting him to perform. It was racism dressed in civility, prejudice softened into casual comments, the kind that leaves no scar on the skin but bruises the soul. Marcus's closest refuge was his mother, Angela, a woman with quiet strength. She carried the weight of holding the household together while her husband traveled from base to base. She reminded Marcus daily of his worth, whispering that his voice mattered, that he was more than how others saw him. But even she couldn't fully shield him. She knew the looks, the murmurs, the stereotypes. She had lived them herself. In the evenings, Marcus often found himself staring at the empty seat at their dinner table. His father's absence was both painful and strangely comforting. Colonel Williams was a man of discipline, forged in battlefields Marcus couldn't imagine. Conversations with him often felt like briefings, precise, controlled, heavy with expectation. "You must always carry yourself with honor," his father would say. "Because you're not just representing yourself, you're representing me, our family, our name." Marcus nodded, but deep down he wrestled with what that meant. To him, honor wasn't about uniforms or titles. It was about being seen, truly seen for who he was, without assumptions, without labels. But in their wealthy suburban bubble, Being seen meant something else entirely. At the local diner, Marcus noticed how waiters' smiles lingered longer for white families. At the country club pool, whispers followed him when he swam alone. At school basketball games, cheers were louder when he scored, but respect ended the moment he left the court. Still, Marcus carried himself with quiet resilience. He dreamed not of war or medals, but of architecture, of designing buildings that would outlast prejudice, spaces that welcomed everyone. He sketched late at night by his window, pencil scratching across paper while the neighborhood lights blinked out one by one. Yet even in his dreams, the weight of identity pressed down. He was a young black man in America, standing at the crossroads of privilege and prejudice, of power and invisibility. What no one around him knew, what Marcus himself barely understood, was that the invisible threads of his life were tightening toward a breaking point. A night that would force his hidden identity into the open, where every whisper of doubt, every sideways glance, every subtle insult would explode into something undeniable. That night would come in the form of 4 men, a restaurant too elegant for confrontation, and a truth so explosive it would silence everyone in the room. And for Marcus, it would not just be a fight for dignity. It would be the moment his father's shadow collided with his own struggle. The moment. The world would see him not as just another black teenager, but as the son of a man whose name carried weight far beyond those restaurant walls. The stage was set. The masks people wore were about to crack. And Marcus, whether ready or not, would be at the center of it all. The following week felt like a test Marcus hadn't studied for, each day presenting a new challenge that had nothing to do with math or history, and everything to do with survival. It started small. A Monday morning in the school hallway, Marcus opened his locker, the metal squeal loud in the crowded corridor when a voice behind him snickered. "Yo, Marcus, what's good? You in the wrong hallway again?" It was Derek, one of the seniors. His tone was casual, almost friendly on the surface. But the smirk on his face and the chuckles of his friends told a different story. Marcus had heard it before. Wrong hallway was code. It meant you don't belong here. Not in this school. Not in this neighborhood. Not in this space carved out by unspoken rules. Marcus swallowed the heat rising in his chest. He forced a smile, closed his locker, and walked away. His sneakers squeaked against the linoleum, each step echoing louder than the laughter behind him. He had learned long ago that snapping back only gave them more fuel, but Derek wasn't done. By lunch, he and his friends had spread a new rumor. Marcus only got into the honors program because of diversity quotas. The words stung more than the laughter. Marcus had studied late into the night, worked twice as hard as anyone else in that class. Yet to them his effort was invisible. His achievement had already been dismissed, repackaged as charity. That evening at home, Marcus sat at the dinner table, swirling peas around his plate. His mother noticed the silence immediately. "What happened today?" she asked gently. Marcus shrugged, trying to hide the weight in his shoulders. "Same stuff. Just jokes." Angela reached across the table, resting her hand over his. "Jokes can hurt more than fists. Don't you ever forget that." Her words gave him comfort but also fear. If small words could hurt this much, what would happen when the stakes got bigger? By midweek, the pressure tightened further. Marcus was called to the principal's office. He had never been in trouble before, so the summons felt like a trap. Sitting across from Principal Harkins, a balding man with sharp glasses and a rehearsed smile, Marcus fidgeted with his hands. "Marcus," the principal began, "a teacher mentioned you've been disruptive in class discussions. Too outspoken, maybe a bit argumentative. We just want to make sure you're not becoming a distraction. Disruptive, argumentative." The words didn't fit Marcus. He wasn't loud in class. If anything, he held back, carefully weighing every word. But he knew what was happening. His willingness to challenge assumptions, to ask questions others avoided, had been recast as defiance. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful," Marcus said softly. "I'm sure you didn't," Harkins replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "But just remember, you represent more than just yourself. You understand?" Marcus nodded, though inside he burned. That phrase again. You represent more than just yourself. He heard it from his father, from teachers, from strangers who never gave him the benefit of individuality. He wasn't Marcus. He was a stand-in, a symbol, a stereotype waiting to be confirmed. As he left the office, he caught the eyes of 2 white students in the hallway, whispering and grinning. One of them muttered under his breath, "Told you he'd get called out." Friday brought the most cutting moment of all. Marcus had been invited, more by circumstance than welcome, into a group project for history class. His partner Emily seemed friendly enough, though she carried the kind of politeness that always felt slightly strained around him. They met at the public library. Laptops open, stacks of books spread across the table. Things were going smoothly until Emily's phone buzzed with a message. She laughed under her breath, then turned the screen toward Marcus. It was a group chat with her friends. One message read, "Working with Marcus? Lucky you. Bet he'll handle all the sports questions." The others had responded with laughing emojis. Emily looked at him, awkward, almost apologetic. "They're just joking," she said. Marcus stared at the screen, a knot twisting in his chest. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just jokes." But inside, the cracks were widening. That weekend, Marcus tried to clear his head. He sketched by the window, pencil gliding over paper, the lines of a bridge forming beneath his hand. He imagined a structure strong enough to hold any weight, graceful enough to connect any divide. But his concentration broke when headlights swept across the driveway. His father was home. Colonel Williams stepped through the door, uniform still crisp, boots echoing against the hardwood. The air always shifted when he entered, heavy, disciplined, unyielding. At dinner, his father asked the usual question, "How are you carrying yourself, son?" Marcus hesitated. He wanted to tell him everything, the jokes, the whispers, the stares, but he could already hear the response, "Stand taller. Work harder. Don't let them break you." So instead, Marcus said, "I'm fine." The colonel nodded, satisfied. "Good, because you know who you are. You're my son. Don't ever let anyone forget that." Marcus forced a smile, but the words cut deeper than intended. Because the truth was, he didn't want to be defined only as the colonel's son. He wanted to be Marcus. Just Marcus. And yet, as he stared at his father's rigid posture, the metals gleaming on his chest, he couldn't shake the feeling that being just Marcus was never going to be enough for the world around him. The week ended, but the tension didn't. Each incident stacked like bricks on his shoulders, each whisper sharpening the edge of his anger. Marcus carried them quietly, but inside a storm was gathering, a storm that would break, not in the hallways of his school or the confines of his home, but in a public place where eyes would be watching, where silence would be impossible, and where four men would test not just his dignity, but the hidden truth of who he really was. The stage was no longer just set. The first tremors had begun. Marcus had always thought of the library as a safe place. Rows of books muffled the outside world. Silence was enforced not by cruelty but by respect. But even there he couldn't escape the invisible lines drawn around him. On Monday afternoon, Marcus stopped by to return a stack of history books. The librarian, Mrs. Aldridge, glanced up from her desk as he approached. She smiled at the student in front of him, a white boy returning a single paperback. When it was Marcus's turn, her smile faded, replaced by a thin line of suspicion. "Are you sure you checked all these out?" she asked, scanning the barcodes with deliberate slowness. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, keeping his tone even. She narrowed her eyes. "It's just unusual. Students don't usually check out this many books at once." Marcus bit back a reply. She wasn't asking. She was accusing. The implication hung heavy. These couldn't possibly belong to him. By the time she waved him away, the sting had already lodged itself deep. He stepped outside, clutching his backpack like a shield. The weight of silence pressed down. No one else had spoken up. Not the boy in line. Not the mother waiting behind him. They had all seen it, all heard it, and yet their eyes slid away. Silence had consequences. That evening, Marcus met with his best friend, Jamal. Jamal was one of the few people who truly got him, a wiry kid with an easy laugh and sharp wit, the kind who always said what Marcus was too cautious to. They sat on the bleachers at the empty basketball court, the late sun bleeding orange across the sky. "You gonna let her talk to you like that?" Jamal asked after Marcus told him about the library. Marcus shrugged. "What was I supposed to do? Start an argument in the middle of the library? Then I'd just prove her point." Jamal leaned back, shaking his head. "Man, that's the trap. They want you silent. They want you second-guessing every move. That's how they win." Marcus looked out across the court, silent. He wanted to believe Jamal was wrong, But deep down, he knew his friend was right. Later that week, Marcus faced a test that cut even deeper. It happened at the mall, a place where teenagers went to shed their school day identities. Marcus and Jamal wandered through the gleaming corridors, past bright storefronts and neon signs. They stopped at a clothing store laughing over a pair of ridiculous oversized sunglasses. That's when the security guard appeared. "Can I help you boys?" the guard asked, his voice too sharp to be genuine. His eyes darted to their hands, their pockets, their bags. "We're just looking," Marcus said quickly. The guard didn't move. He hovered near them, radio crackling on his belt. Shoppers glanced over, curiosity mixing with quiet judgment. Marcus felt the heat of their stares, the unspoken suspicion. Of course. After a few minutes, Marcus and Jamal left the store empty-handed. As they walked away, Jamal muttered, "See? Doesn't matter what you wear or how you talk. To them, we're suspects before we're even people." Marcus's chest tightened. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Carry yourself with honor." But what did honor matter when the world had already judged him guilty? The weight grew heavier when the police entered the picture. One evening, Marcus was walking home from Jamal's house when flashing blue lights bathed the street. A patrol car slowed to a stop beside him. "Hey you," the officer called. "Come here a sec." Marcus froze, heart pounding. He hadn't done anything. His backpack carried nothing but schoolwork and sketches. But he knew better than to argue. "Where you headed?" the officer asked. "Home, sir," Marcus replied carefully. "Mind if I take a look in that bag?" Marcus hesitated. He wanted to say no. He knew his rights, but he also knew the risk of asserting them. Slowly, he unzipped the bag, pulling out his notebooks and pencils. The officer flipped through them carelessly, as if searching for evidence of something that wasn't there. Finally, he grunted and waved Marcus off. "Be careful out here," he said, as though Marcus were the threat. When the cruiser pulled away, Marcus stood trembling under the streetlight. His sketches fluttered in the wind, one page torn loose and tumbling down the pavement. He chased it, clutching the paper to his chest as if it were proof of his existence. Silence again. No neighbors had stepped out. No one had questioned the stop. The world kept turning, indifferent. That night, Marcus dreamed of his father. In the dream, Colonel Williams stood tall in his uniform, medals gleaming, surrounded by soldiers who saluted him. But when Marcus approached, the soldiers' eyes shifted, their salutes faltered. They looked at him not as the colonel's son, but as a stranger, an outsider. He woke with a start, sweat dampening his sheets. The dream lingered, sharp as glass. Even in his sleep, the shadow of his father's reputation pressed down. The following Sunday, Marcus attended church with his mother. The sanctuary was filled with hymns, voices rising in harmony. For a while, he felt at peace. The congregation, mostly black families, offered him something he rarely felt elsewhere: belonging. But after the service, a conversation with Pastor Green unsettled him. "Marcus," the pastor said kindly, resting a hand on his shoulder, "I've been hearing about some of the trouble at school. You've got to be wise, son. Don't draw attention to yourself. Stay quiet, stay humble." Marcus forced a nod, but inside frustration boiled. Stay quiet, stay humble. Always dim his light so others wouldn't feel threatened by it, even here. In a place meant for refuge, the message was the same. Silence was survival. All the while, an invisible thread tugged at Marcus toward something he couldn't name. His father's schedule had changed. There were hushed phone calls at odd hours, closed-door conversations Marcus wasn't supposed to overhear. Snippets of words floated through the house: security, briefing, threat. Marcus began to wonder if his father's world was about to collide with his own in ways he couldn't imagine. By the end of the week, Marcus's world felt like a tightening vice. Each incident piled on top of the last: the librarian's suspicion, the mall security guard's shadow, the police officer's cold authority, the pastor's warning. Every voice told him the same thing: you don't belong. Be careful. Stay quiet. But beneath the silence, something inside Marcus stirred. He was tired of shrinking, tired of pretending, tired of waiting for dignity to be handed to him like a favor. And though he didn't know it yet, the breaking point was coming. A single night, a single moment, would shatter the careful balance he had tried so hard to maintain. It would happen in a restaurant filled with polished silverware and polished lies. It would involve 4 men who believed their cruelty carried no consequence. and it would reveal a truth about Marcus that none of them were ready for. The storm was no longer just on the horizon. It was gathering above his head, lightning flickering at the edges of the sky. And soon, it would strike. The restaurant smelled of buttered lobster and seared filet mignon, a place where waiters moved like shadows, and conversation was spoken in hushed, polished tones. Marcus sat stiffly across from his mother, trying to drown in the quiet luxury around them. It was her idea to eat here tonight. She had insisted. "You deserve to be seen in these spaces, Marcus. You belong here as much as anyone else." He wanted to believe her. He wanted the chandeliers, the velvet curtains, the polished glasses to accept him without question. But every glance from the other diners felt like a reminder, "You're out of place." Angela smiled at him, determined to make this night feel normal. "How's the sketchbook coming along?" she asked. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but then it happened. A hand clamped down on his shoulder. Hard. "Hey, kid," a voice drawled. "You lost?" Marcus turned. 4 men loomed over him, their suits too casual for the elegance of the place, their smiles sharp as broken glass. The leader, a broad man with a scar slicing across his cheek, leaned in close. "You don't look like you can afford to sit here," he sneered. Angela's fork froze mid-air. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "We're having dinner. Please leave us alone." The scarred man chuckled. "Oh, we don't mean any harm, ma'am. Just making sure the boy knows his place." The other 3 laughed, the sound low and menacing. One of them tipped over Marcus's water glass, the cold liquid spilling across the table, soaking into his sketches tucked by his plate. The paper curled and bled, lines of his bridge dissolving into nothing. Marcus's chest tightened. His dream, ruined in seconds. "Stop!" he shouted, grabbing at the pages, but his protest only fueled them. One of the men yanked him from his chair, slamming him against the table so violently that glasses toppled, shattering across the floor. Gasps erupted from nearby tables. A waiter dropped his tray with a crash. Angela rose to her feet. "Let him go!" she cried, her voice breaking. The scarred man leaned closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You don't belong here, boy. People like you don't sit at tables like this. You serve at them." Marcus's heart pounded, his vision tunneling. He could feel every eye in the restaurant on him, watching but not moving. Some diners whispered. Others turned away, hiding behind their menus as if pretending not to see would absolve them. Silence. The same silence that had haunted him at school, at the mall, on the sidewalk. But this was different. This silence cut deeper. It said, "You're on your own." One of the men shoved him harder. Marcus stumbled, hitting the floor. His palms scraped against broken glass, blood mixing with spilled wine. The crimson stain spread across the white tablecloth like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. "Marcus!" Angela dropped to her knees beside him, trying to help him up. But another man shoved her back into her chair. "Stay out of it, lady!" he barked. Tears burned Marcus's eyes, not just from pain but from humiliation. His body shook with rage, but he was frozen. The weight of years of being told to stay quiet, stay humble, stay small, chaining him to the floor. The scarred man crouched, gripping Marcus by the collar. His voice was low, meant for Marcus alone. "Listen good, boy. Nobody here is gonna save you. Not your mom, not these people. You're nothing." The words sliced deeper than the glass cutting his hands. Marcus wanted to scream, to fight, to tear himself free. But the room felt like it was caving in, the air too heavy to breathe, and then a whisper slipped out of him. A whisper that cracked with both fear and defiance. "You have no idea who I am." The scarred man froze for half a second, caught off guard by the tremor of certainty in Marcus's voice. Then he laughed, cruel and sharp. "Who you are? You're a nobody, just a scared little kid in the wrong place." But across the room, one man at a corner table had risen to his feet. His chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. He wasn't just another diner. His face was pale, his eyes wide, because he recognized Marcus, recognized him in a way these attackers never could. And in that split second, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Something dangerous and unstoppable was about to unfold. Because the truth that would shatter this room and silence the laughter, had been hidden in plain sight all along. Marcus wasn't just any teenager. He wasn't just another target for cruelty. He was the son of one of the most powerful men in the United States Army. And the moment that truth came to light, nothing, not for Marcus, not for his attackers, not for anyone in that restaurant where we would ever be the same. The restaurant was still, the kind of stillness that follows disaster, when everyone knows something irreversible has happened but no one dares to speak first. Broken glass glistened on the floor like scattered ice, red wine bleeding across white linens in ugly stains. Marcus lay trembling, his palms sliced open, breath ragged.
His mother clutched him tightly,
shielding him with her body as if her embrace could undo the humiliation, the blood, the pain. And then a voice broke the silence. Low, commanding, unmistakable. Let him go. The scarred man jerked his head toward the sound. Standing near the corner table was a tall figure in a dark suit. His posture was ramrod straight, his expression carved from stone. Even without the uniform, even without the medals, there was no mistaking him. Colonel David Williams. The colonel's eyes locked on his son. For a heartbeat, emotion flickered across his face. Fury, fear, and something heavier, something Marcus had never seen in him before. Vulnerability. The attackers froze, confusion spreading across their faces. One of them stammered, "Wait, you mean—" "Yes," the colonel cut in, his voice like steel. "He's my son." The room erupted in whispers. Forks clattered against plates, breaths caught in throats. The same diners who had sat frozen in silence now leaned forward, their curiosity burning hotter than their shame. The scarred man's smirk faltered. He released Marcus's collar, his bravado crumbling. We didn't know," he muttered. Angela rose to her feet, fury radiating from her. "You didn't care to know," she snapped. Her voice trembled with rage. "You saw his skin and thought that was all you needed." The men shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the eyes of the entire restaurant pressing down on them. But the damage had been done. The blood on Marcus's hands, the torn sketches at his feet, the humiliation he would carry long after this night. None of it could be erased by their cowardly excuses. Colonel Williams strode forward, towering over them. His presence filled the room, every step heavy with restrained power. "You think your ignorance excuses you?" he demanded. "You think my son's worth depends on my rank? On my name?" His voice rose, sharp and thunderous. "He is worthy because he is human, and you failed to see that." The words cut deeper than any blade. The attackers had no reply. Marcus, still trembling, looked up at his father. For once, the colonel's mask of authority slipped. His eyes softened, glistening with something Marcus never expected to see. Shame. Not shame for his son, but for himself. Because for years he had told Marcus to stand tall, to carry the family name like armor. But tonight proved what Marcus had always known. Armor didn't matter when the world refused to see the person inside it. The restaurant emptied slowly after that, guests whispering to one another, faces pale, as though they had witnessed something more than an assault. Something systemic, something that had always been there, just hidden under chandeliers and fine wine until it spilled out in the open. The attackers were escorted out by management, their laughter and cruelty gone, replaced by fear of consequences that might finally come. But Marcus knew. They weren't afraid because of what they had done to him. They were afraid because of who he was, and that truth stung most of all. News of the incident spread quickly. By morning, local media buzzed with headlines. Colonel's son assaulted at upscale restaurant. The story wasn't about Marcus, the boy. It was about the colonel's reputation, the scandal of 4 men daring to touch someone tied to power. Jamal called him first thing. "Man, you're everywhere. Everybody's talking about it." But Marcus didn't feel powerful. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt hollow, because the same people who had ignored him yesterday now pretended to care, but only because his last name made him visible. At school, whispers followed him through the hallways. Some were sympathetic, others envious, but all of them carried the same undertone. He's not like us. He's untouchable now, but Marcus knew better. Untouchable? No. He had been touched, shoved, humiliated, cut open in front of a room full of silent witnesses. And that silence said more than any headline ever could. That evening, Marcus sat with his father in the living room. The colonel, usually unshakable, sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly together. "I failed you," he said quietly. Marcus blinked, startled. What? I taught you to rely on my name, my rank. I thought it would protect you. But tonight proved it doesn't, not really, because they didn't see my son. They saw a black boy they thought they could break. His voice cracked, raw and unpolished, and I wasn't there soon enough to stop it. For the first time, Marcus saw his father not as an unyielding soldier, but as a man carrying his own weight of regret. Marcus swallowed hard. Dad, I don't want to just be your son. I want to be me. I want to be seen for who I am. The colonel's eyes met his and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement, a promise. The pain of that night lingered. The injustice was not undone, the wounds not magically healed. But something had shifted. Masks had been torn off. The silence had been broken. And though Marcus's path forward would not be easy, he knew this. He would no longer shrink himself to fit the comfort of others. The storm had struck and he was still standing. The world had seen him, maybe not as he wanted, not yet. But they had seen him, and the next time, he would make sure they saw him fully. The days after the restaurant incident blurred together for Marcus. Reporters called, stories spread, and suddenly his name carried weight, not because of who he was, but because of what had happened to him. His face appeared on TV screens, framed by headlines that cared less about the pain in his eyes and more about the shock of his father's title. Colonel's son attacked in public. To the world, Marcus had become a symbol. But symbols are heavy things to carry, especially when you never asked to bear them. At school, classmates avoided meeting his gaze. Teachers treated him with kid gloves as if every word might shatter him. The same students who had once mocked him now whispered about him in awe, afraid to say the wrong thing. But beneath their stares, Marcus felt the same old truth. They still didn't see him. They saw a story, a scandal, a reminder of injustice they didn't know how to face. Angela worried constantly, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She replayed the night in her head over and over. Her baby's body slammed against a table, the fear that she might lose him not to war but to prejudice in their own backyard. Jamal stayed close, his loyalty unshaken, but even he admitted the attention scared him. They'll come for you harder now, he warned. People don't like when the spotlight shifts their comfort. And yet, amid the exhaustion, something else stirred in Marcus. Clarity. The night at the restaurant had ripped away his illusions. For years he had believed, or at least tried to believe, that his father's name could shield him, that excellence, obedience, and silence could earn him safety. But safety built on borrowed armor is not safety at all. The truth was cruel and simple. Those men had not cared who his father was. They had not cared about his sketchbook or his dreams or his quiet strength. They had only cared about the color of his skin. And if his worth depended on his father's rank, then what of every other boy who looked like him? What shield protected them? Marcus began to speak. First in classrooms, then in community centers, then at rallies where his voice shook at the microphone but grew stronger with every word. He told his story not as the colonel's son, but as himself. He spoke about the silence of the bystanders, the casual cruelty of strangers, the invisible weight he had carried long before that night. And people listened. Some shifted uncomfortably, some cried, some nodded in recognition, because his story was theirs too. Colonel Williams watched from the sidelines, pride and regret warring in his eyes. He had spent his life commanding soldiers, demanding discipline, wielding authority. But it was his son, trembling, scarred, unpolished, who commanded truth. And truth was more powerful than rank. Angela stood by Marcus's side, fierce as ever, reminding him that his voice was not just his own, but part of a chorus stretching back generations. Every word he spoke stitched him into a larger story, the story of survival, of resistance, of refusing to be defined by prejudice. The men who attacked Marcus faced charges, though their apologies rang hollow. They insisted it had been a misunderstanding, a mistake. But Marcus knew better. Racism does not begin with fists. It begins with the belief that some people belong and others do not. And yet Marcus did not let their violence define the ending of his story. He chose to write it himself. Months later, he returned to the same restaurant. Not as a victim, not as a headline, but as a young man walking into the place where he had been broken and choosing not to stay broken. He sat at a table near the window, sketchbook open, pencil moving steadily across the page. His lines were sure, his vision clear. He drew what he saw. A room once filled with silence, now filled with resilience. When the waiter asked if he wanted anything else, Marcus smiled faintly. "Just this," he said, tapping the sketchbook. "This is enough." For the first time, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't shrinking. He wasn't waiting for someone else's name to shield him. He was Marcus Williams, and that was enough. But as powerful as his healing was, the story doesn't end neatly. Because Marcus's scars are real, his fears are real, and the system that made that night possible still exists. So the question lingers, one that should haunt every viewer. If Marcus hadn't been the son of a colonel, if his name carried no weight at all, would anyone have cared? Would anyone have spoken? Would anyone have believed him? The answer matters. Because somewhere right now another teenager is sitting quietly at a table, dreaming big dreams, sketching his future, and whether his story ends in silence or in strength depends on what we choose to do when the moment comes. Will we look away, or will we finally see?